I thank the collective for giving me an opportunity to express my solidarity and condolences to this departed soul, Professor Gail Omvedt. Um, I have not known her personally, except on one occasion where I chaired a session and she was there. Uh, but I also not read her very acutely nor interacted with her. So it's not in the form of any memories or her scholarly interventions that I can speak of Gail. Nevertheless, I would like to look at the larger trajectory of anti-caste thought and how entire generation of students, especially from the 90s onwards, have been attracted towards scholars, and one of the important scholars has been Gail Omvedt, and how they've used the resources and think about a certain alternative idea of Indian academia, especially the social science academia itself. And I think she has been giving that kind of confidence to look at an alternate epistemology or a different intellectual tradition, if that is what she wanted to do. And there has been a very good response from fellow Dalith Bahujan scholars in that direction. Now, I'll just make some broader points, which actually are repeating some of the points which has already been made by the first speaker, Dr. Varsha, and my colleague, Dr. Tirunavkaras. Uh, so the points both of them were making, and I think it's very important to engage with that point, is uh, the they were posing problems. Gail, Elena Ziliad, this Barbara Joshi, all these three women and several other scholars included, they were trying to radically open up formal disciplines like sociology, like Dr. Varsha was saying, political science in some sense, to questions of caste and gender in a very radical way. This is not the accepted canonical way that caste and gender used to be thought of. I mean, this could, I would also like to include Uma Chakravarti in some sense. They were part of this kind of trying to think of a Brahmin patriarchy. I do not know if that concept still survives, but they were putting up this larger template and trying to think through this kind of a template. Um, Now, what is so important about anti-caste thought? In a certain way, when you're looking at the other intellectual traditions, especially in social science scholarship, humanities scholarship, you have one is a nationalist tradition, the other one is a communist intellectual tradition. Now, anti-caste thought has been, in some sense, a practice in some ways. And this practice has been, in some way, formalized, theorized by thinkers, of course, anti-caste thinkers from Phule, Ambedkar, and others, but it was made available in an academic setting. And that seems to be a very important contribution of people like Gail. I would also include somebody like Locious and so many others who brought it to the academia for a easy reading, for a certain kind. They stimulated thinking in a certain direction, which was not available in this very what do you call many layered, very convoluted formulations of these disciplines, because caste is so I mean it is so opaque. There's a certain opacity about it, and they made it even more opaque, the formal disciplines. And these were people who were bringing a certain sense to understand caste. And I would think this was why I was reading a whole lot of writing on the social media, and students have found us so stimulating. And they found us so stimulating because other scholarship does not provide that kind of a direction to think, that kind of a sense, meaning of understanding caste. And I think that's a huge contribution to the Indian academia. But as Dr. Varsha was also saying, there has been, although this scholarship only comes in the late 80s, Gail started writing in the 70s, but this is foregrounded her work on Ambedkar and the anti-caste intellectual movement comes in the, I would think, in the early 90s. Now, this 90s is also, today we find there is a Brahmanical scholarship which is completely undervalued a work. And it is only, as my colleagues have put it, the Dalith Bahujan scholars who are preserving this tradition. This is some broad formulation that I had, which is basically a repetition of what others have said. But I'm going to pick on a particular issue, a particular historically related issue that she raises in Begumpura. And that is very interesting because she goes on to argue in Begumpura, the most creative movements of anti-caste happened in the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, if you say the most creative movements have happened in the 16th and 17th century, then, the most creative movement, she puts it. And then there is a certain kind of a decline. For the 19th and 20th century, there's a decline. So the Bhakti movement, the saints and the minstrels, have provided a certain epistemic register, a certain creative aesthetic, which is far more valuable than it looks as if what the 20th century has produced or the 19th century has produced. Now, I would like to go back to a certain way of thinking about Indology, which is happening in the scholarship of people like Andrew Nicholson, who is also related to this person, Sheldon Pollock and others. Now, what they're saying is, they're saying from 8th century, there's a continuing tradition, a Brahmanical tradition, the Vedic tradition. And especially around 16th century, there is an effort at systematizing Hindu philosophy. So it is not in the 19th century that there is an effort to kind of think about a nation, think about a religious identity. It is not the 19th century, but they're saying it is the from 10th and 11th to the 16th century where these things are happening. By 16th century, that effort seems to what do you call decline. It is not something which is continued. That systematizing of Indian philosophy is not happening in after the 16th century. From 16th to 19th century, there is a certain decline of intellectual work, religious scholarship, philosophical, theological work, creative work amongst the Brahmins. The Brahmanical tradition is not producing anything. And here is Gail Omvedt saying, people like from Namdev, Kabir, Ravidas, Tukaram, and of course she connects them to Phule, Ramabai, Ambedkar. Now there are a whole lot of people who are talking about a casteless, classless society, and that such a society is looked at as very prosperous. A certain Ethiopic imagination is already developed in the 16th and 17th century. So this Ethiopia, which is in the 16th and 17th century, is not talking about a unifying Hinduism or unifying Brahmanism at all. Now, I was wondering, and there is a very scant scholarship in Indology as well. Indology comes up to the 16th century, but past 16th century, Indology is saying there is a decline in the Vedic or the Brahmanic scholarship. Now, this thread of argument, I'm not sure how many, as far as I know in my limited understanding of Indology, this thread of argument, I would think Gail's marvelous insight can be taken up by students and reworked in a way that it connects to the 19th and 20th century anti-caste thought. Why is this important? Why this point which I'm making is important? Because if you look at the text that Ambedkar is reacting, or if you look at the text that various anti-caste intellectuals are reacting in the 20th century and also in the 19th century, they are reacting to texts like Manodharma. They are reacting to texts like something like Bhagavad Gita. Now, if you look at the corpus in which the Brahmin scholars have worked earlier, these are not important texts. The Manodharma is not important prior to 19th century. The Bhagavad Gita is not important to 19th century. And who brings these texts? These texts are bought by colonial officials. Why is Bhagavad Gita bought? Bhagavad Gita is bought because they think it is, in some sense, a precursor to Christian theology. And that is taken up by the nationalist elites, by the cultural elites. Is not text at all prior to 19th century. So in some ways, scholars who are theorizing, whether they're theorizing colonial anthropology or colonialism, colonial knowledge systems, or the nationalist knowledge system which comes against the colonial and in reaction to colonialism, or anti-caste, these three are connected. They are speaking to each other only in the 19th century. But what Gail seems to be doing is trying to free, as it were, what is anti-caste thought to a much longer tradition, to much longer thinking of democracy, to much longer thinking of political practice. So I find I'm not. This is something which this is a certain kind of what do you call a formulation which has no basis in scholarship, but it's something that we could try out. Why there is no Brahmin utopia between 16th to 18th centuries, and why there is a subaltern utopia in the 16th and 18th centuries. I'm not a historian, but historians should tell me. And I to some extent, have surveyed the literature. The literature is apart from Sheldon Pollock's work, Andrew Nicholson's work, and also more recently Elaine Fisher's work, that period is not a very great period for Brahmanical philosophy or religious creativity or aesthetic creativity. It's not. So I would look at Begumpura as a kind of theorizing of the intellectual history of the anti-caste movement. And intellectual history is not against a religious history. And creativity is happening in several registers, as it were, the affective register, the intellectual register, the material register. It's happening. So for me, there are several things perhaps we could talk about Gail, because I'm interested in this sphere of thing. I mean, I've been working in this area for more recently. I thought it's a wonderful insight that she's providing to cultural historians, to certain kind of critical Indologists, to reimagine the space of not merely the anti-caste thought, but a certain kind of imaginary, which is not not just from Phule to Ambedkar, but a much larger trajectory. As somebody who's interested in cultural history, that's what captured me in the recent past. And I thought Gail had something to offer. And thank you so much for this.